Welcome to San Diego Integral, May 13th, 2023. Our session today is titled The Way Up is the Way Down, or Fun with Eros and Agape, presented by KarenVoorhees. Hi, welcome to San Diego Integral. I'm Jerry Golick. I am going to be your host for today, and I'm a member of San Diego Integral's leadership team. We have an exciting presentation today. Our own Karen Voorhees will be presenting. Her title is The Way Up is the Way Down, or Fun with Eros and Agape. And we'll begin shortly, but first I'd like to mention that we will be recording this meeting. If you'd prefer not to be seen in video, you can just turn off your camera, though we do like to see your faces. Note that the recording is of the speaker view. So if you're in the gallery, you won't be recorded unless you make a comment or ask a question. And the breakouts, when we have breakout sessions, they are not recorded. The link to the recording for the meeting will be posted on Meetup and on San Diego Integral's YouTube channel a day or two after this presentation. You can find out information about San Diego Integral at sandiegointegral.org, and that will list our future events. And we're also on Meetup and Facebook, and you can find links to those on the sandiegointegral.org website. If you join one of those groups, the Meetup or Facebook, then you'll automatically get notifications of new events that we schedule. And if you ever have any questions or comments about the meetings, you're welcome to contact one of our leadership team, either through Meetup or Facebook. So next month, we'll be meeting on June 10th at 4 p.m. Our meetings are always on the second Saturday of the month at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And we haven't nailed down our presentation for next month, but we'll be posting that as soon as we get it. And finally, we'd like to invite you to make a small donation to San Diego Integral to help us to cover the meetup fees and the web hosting fees and whatnot. And you can make that donation at sandiegointegral.org. Just a few quick housekeeping details before we get started. If we have a Q&A today, or sessions for comments or questions, you can unmute your mic and speak, or it's great if you use the raise your hand feature. So that's under the reactions tab. And on a laptop or desktop, that button is at the lower edge of the screen. If you're on a tablet or phone, you usually have to touch the screen to have that reactions button show up. And then you can put the raise your hand button, and then that just cues people up in order, and we can take people in the order that they've raised their hand. That's a handy way to do it. We do have members of the leadership team checking out the chat. So if you have questions or comments, you're welcome to put those in the chat, and we'll try to answer questions if they're technical or whatever. And we'll also try to feed questions to the presenter during the question and answer sessions. And the formal presentation today will last for 2 hours until 6 p.m. Pacific time. And then after the formal presentation, we always have about somewhere between a half hour and an hour of informal time. And that's just for discussion, general discussion, further exploration of the topic, questions. So sometimes folks need to drop off right at the end of the formal session, but you're always welcome to stay for that additional informal social time. We'd love to have you. Before we get to the presentation, we would like to welcome any newcomers. And so if there's anyone new here, we'd like to invite you to just unmute your mic and let us know your name, where you're calling from, and how you heard about San Diego Integral. So you can raise your hand, or if I see Will.
Howdy. Hello. My name's Will. I'm in Australia, Queens.
Great. Welcome, Will.
Thank you. I'm not sure where I saw the meeting. It might have been if you've cross-promoted. I'm kind of addicted to Zoom meetings. I do a couple a day, usually on philosophy, things like that. So I might have got it through the Seattle Analytic Philosophy group. website if they promote other people's groups.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure, but it looks interesting. So thanks for having me.
Okay, welcome. Well, who else is new? Christopher, I see Christopher Adams.
Yeah. Well, I actually participated in San Diego Integral maybe 10 years ago when I was at Kabir's house for a little while.
Great.
And I'm back up in Oregon for a while, and I'm friends with Karen. And so I was definitely looking forward to checking out the presentation.
Great. Welcome. Johan.
Yes, Johan, thank you. I'm in Lancaster, California. I cross paths with Karen in the Sex Ecology Spirit reading group on Integral Life. Really awesome for you guys to be hosting this space. Lovely. Thank you.
Welcome. I see Pam.
Yes, I am in North Tustin, California, just 5 miles from Disneyland. And I probably heard you from Pacific Integral, but I also know Kathy Andrews and Helen Rawlinson, so I've been familiar with your meetings.
Great. Welcome, Pam. I think I see some more new faces. Lynn, I see.
Yes, I'm Lynn Orion from Sacramento, and I've known Karen through her meditation group. We've both been very active with that and other activities beyond.
Okay. Welcome, Lynn. Who else is new to here today? Wave your hand here.
I'm here from Michigan. I've been here a few times, but I'm relatively new here, so I'm happy to be here and look forward to the great presentation. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
I think Friend was waving her hand.
Okay, friend, go ahead. You want to unmute yourself?
I am from Seattle, and I'm in another group with Karen, and she always makes my mind sparkle. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, welcome, friend. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Well, if we missed anybody, welcome. Oh, Regis, are you? What did I see a hand waving there?
Yeah, hi, I'm Regis. I know Karen from another Gebser group that we participated in, and then we kind of branched off and started talking about our spirituality and other stuff and experiences living in ashrams and spiritual traditions sort of privately. So she sent me this. I've heard a lot of this stuff from her before, so I'm looking forward to seeing what it all rolls up into. Thanks.
Welcome, Regis. All right.
Sorry to interrupt. There's messages in the chat that people can't get into the meeting and there are people waiting in the waiting room, apparently. I'm not sure if you've seen those messages in the chat there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anyone in the waiting room right now, but and I sent the meeting ID and link in the chat for Pam, if you could forward it to those people that you. And you've got your hand up, Pam. Is that from before? Yeah, I'll just put it down then.
So our tech folks will try to address those questions. Thanks for pointing that out. And we are going to go ahead and move along with our getting our introduction here. So at this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Tom, who is going to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Jerry. Welcome aboard, everyone. And I get the pleasure of introducing KarenVoorhees. Karen was 15 years old when three things deeply imprinted her life. The first, publication of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. She fell deeply in love with the Middle Earth, the Western Ages, and humanities in general. Number two, Star Trek. Its optimistic vision of a collective future counterbalanced fear of nuclear annihilation. I like that one too. Number three, Summer of Love, whose epicenter was in San Francisco. Karen became a flower child, which morphed during her college years into a humanities nerd. Her words, not mine. Just as she was completing her PhD in medieval cultural history, she began meditating and discovered that there's levels of spiritual truth that far transcend the intellect. She left academia to live as a homemaker, volunteer for a nonprofit world, and pursuing her spiritual path. Today, she channels her passion for the good, the true, and the beautiful into integral communities such as San Diego Integral and into creative writing. Based on her understanding of big history, she has a vision of the future for us, provided we don't freak out over seemingly apocalyptic current events. Without further ado, I give you KarenVoorhees.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you San Diego Integral for inviting me. I've had fun putting this together, and I hope it's fun for us in spite of our apocalyptic current events. I look forward to many possibilities of a glorious future, and these I've kind of rolled them into my presentation today, I hope. So what I'd like to do to start with is a short, less than 3-minute meditation, so we can really arrive. So if you feel like you would like to join this meditation, I invite you to just sit comfortably in your chair, maybe roll your shoulders a bit. This is usually my snap, crackle, pop moment. And just settle in and I will invite you to follow my voice for a simple breathing meditation. If you'd like to shut your eyes, you're welcome to. And simply bring the attention to this breath in this body, in this moment. How does this breath feel in this body? Simply witness the breath coming in. Witnessing the breath going out. Not trying to control the breath. Simply witnessing. Like we would watch the wave rolling up on the beach as it rolls up. With each in-breath, we watch. And simply witness each breath as it leaves. Simply witnessing the breath. If we realize that a train of thought has captured our attention, just smile, let it go, and bring the attention back to this breath in this body, in this moment. Simply witnessing. And now I'll invite you to open your eyes as we join each other. And before I get started on my first set here, I'd just like to make a personal pitch that when people lead meditations or meditative exercises in groups, I would like us always to give ourselves permission to not join if we don't feel like. I have been to some conferences and so on where people just assumed that our presence there meant that we were going to go along with whatever technique they wanted to enroll us in. And some techniques that are being presented these days are very psychoactive, and not everybody is ready for every technique. So I just would like to I would like this to become part of our larger culture, is that we always have permission to sit out any exercise that doesn't feel right, or no, this in any feeling that this doesn't feel good, or I don't feel right about this. You have permission to not join. So just putting that out there in the ether. What I'm doing today is I will be making this presentation in 3 main blocks of 35 minutes each. I'll talk and present my ideas for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then I'll lead another short 2 to 3 minute meditation that will build on the previous ones. After each of the 3 meditations, there will be breakout groups, which you are invited to join or not. If you would prefer not to join a 4-person breakout group to discuss what I've said and what you've experienced in your meditation, you're welcome to simply not click the button to join the group, and you'll stay in the main room. But I hope that many of you will join the 4-person breakout groups, because I'll basically be inviting you to consider, what came up for you during the meditation. And then the breakout group should last maybe 8 minutes if we stay on schedule. And then we'll come back into the main room, and there will be a general discussion for people to share if anything came up for you that you would like to share. Because I'm hoping, I know what I'm saying. I want to hear what you have to say. So I'm really looking forward to the group discussions. So with that, oh yes, and one more thing, there will be a bibliography. I'm citing a number of books and video clips, and instead of putting them in the chat as we go, I've just compiled a bibliography for reference, and Kathleen will be posting that at the end of this talk. So you can get it then if you want to follow up on any of my references or look at any of the video clips I'll be citing. So Kathleen will be handling that. Thank you, tech team, for making all this possible. And so with that, Kathleen, if you could put up that clip of Larry O'Connor's diagram at this point. Well, during the, we just finished reading Ken Wilber's first massive tome, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, with Noali Pereira with the Integral Life Group. Wow. And one of the participants, Larry O'Connor, who is known to some in these parts, came up with the diagram of Eros and Agape, the outgoing, yes, here we go, thank you. The descent, and I'm just, don't worry about the writing, it's the arrows. Ken Wilber has had a lot to say about this. The agape, the Greek word for divine love, the transcendent pours itself out in a torrent of divine love into manifestation. That's the arrow that starts at the top and goes down the right to the bottom of the circle. And the result is us, our universe of 3 dimensions of space and time and matter energy. And the upgoing arrow going up the left, that's the eros, which is the other Greek word for love, which is we associate with erotic. But in the Greek term eros has a much larger connotation. As it says here in Larry's diagram, the love of the lower reaching up to the higher, the love of the created being for its creator, and the longing, the yearning to merge with something greater than itself. That's the curve of energy going back up to join with the transcendent. Ken Wilber has said a lot about Eros and Agape. And at this, let's keep this diagram up on screen. I'm going to quote from Ken Wilber's massive tome, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, from his chapter 9, which is titled The Way Up is the Way Down. Ken Wilber says, we see in Plato one of the first clear descriptions of two movements related to the unspoken one, and he puts one with a capital O, to the extent that it can be verbalized at all. The first movement is a descent of the one into the world of the many, a movement that actually creates the world of the many, in other words, us, blesses the many, and confers goodness on all of it. Spirit immanent in the world, spirit moving into immanence, spirit moving into the world and creating the world. The other movement is the movement of return, and that's going up the left, that's the Eros. The ascent from the many back to the one, a process of remembering or recollecting the good. Spirit transcendent to the world. And again, that's in his chapter entitled The Way Up is the Way Down. And I personally have a very detailed and complex thought structure on the levels that the transcendent goes through coming down into manifestation, and we go back up through the same levels. That's how we have so much potential packed into our world of manifestation, and we go back up those levels of increasing subtlety as we return to the absolutely transcendent. We arrive in manifestation with all of this potential, or this is Rupert Sheldrake's immanence, the implicit order. And then as we evolve back up to the spirit, that becomes explicit. There are many, many terms for this. Every one of the wisdom traditions I know of in the world has its own way of formulating and expressing this. Some of these terms are the transcendent and the manifest. In Taoism, the great Tao, the ultimate unmanifest, the transcendent, the great Tao flows everywhere, to the left and to the right. In other words, into duality. Being great, it flows. It flows far away. Being great, it returns. That's Eastern spirituality. In traditional Western spirituality, we tend to, Christianity at least, we tend to think of this in terms of creation and salvation. Wilber speaks of this in his later works as the fullness of being and the emptiness of form. I think it was Bohm who talked about implicate order as part of the agape and explicate order as part of the eros, the return. Involution and evolution, the list goes on and on. I think we've made the point here. Now, the one step I would like to take is to imagine joining these two arrows so they make a complete circle, because I imagine it as a circuit of energy, an active energy. And I'll be saying more about this in a little while, as we'll see in my next breathing exercise. So if we could return to, we could go ahead and take this image down now. Thanks. So yeah, let me just adjust where, okay. So I have another reading here from one of my favorite speakers, who is Eckhart Tolle. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with him. Many of the great spiritual leaders of the past have spoken about this. Every spiritual tradition, every wisdom tradition in the world came into being because someone or some people had experienced this return to in consciousness, in full consciousness, to the absolute, and spoke to us from that place. There are many people alive today who are speaking to us from that place. Two of my favorites today are Shinzen Young and Eckhart Tolle. I love listening to their clips. And thank you, Chris Adams, for turning me on to Shinzen Young. And I'll be reading, I will have several of his clips in my bibliography, but right now I want to read something from one of my favorite Eckhart Tolle speeches. Eckhart, and I have that in the bibliography also, if you want to download it. It's called The Divine Purpose of the Universe. Somebody asked him in one of his presentations, what is the divine purpose of the universe? And that was kind of a gotcha question, and he answered, Consciousness coming into this dimension is the divine purpose. The universe wants to awaken. But the divine purpose is twofold. There is an outgoing movement into creation, and there is a return movement that wants to realize itself in its essence. The universe wants both. The universe delights in creativity, in creating multiplicity of form. How do I know this? I just look around. Look at all the millions of life forms in the sea, on land, and air. The universe delights in expressing itself in form and in experiencing itself through all these countless forms. And there is a growing complexity in life forms. And I'm adding for myself, a growing complexity of consciousness. We are evolving through greater and greater consciousness on our return arc back to conscious union with the divine. But Eckhart Tolle continues that the universe wants to become conscious of itself through you. That one conscious is not separate from you. You are an expression of it. And that's the outgoing movement. But while the universe wants to go out and create this multiplicity of forms, it wants to return, to know itself and realize its own essence through you while remaining in form. The universe wants to become conscious of itself without losing itself. And this is what awaits us today. This is our next step collectively. So I suggest you listen to that entire clip. It's much better. I haven't done justice to it. I would like to raise one further issue before we go in. I start the next meditation, which is that I recently had a really engaging exchange with Layman Pascal, who was the presenter here 2 months ago, I believe, over whether the term Eros is the best word to use for this, because it immediately associates with erotic. We all think of erotic in second chakra sexuality. So we had an interesting exchange, and it's worth considering whether there would be a better term. I think we're stuck with the term Eros, and I welcome the association with the term erotic. It's only one of the 7 chakras, the sexuality. There's an Eros in every chakra, in every aspect of our being. The yearning to join, the yearning of a separate being to join with some other being and co-create something greater than itself. And we don't have time for this now, but when we start the social hour,
I sat there and I thought, how are women allowed to drive?
Yeah.
How?
Well, thank you for getting rid of him. I will read St. John of the Cross's poem, The Dark Night of the Soul, which is one of the most ascetic spiritual poems, and it's very erotic. So with the permission of the leadership team, I'd like to read that poem, Dark Night of the Soul, to kick off our social hour later. But for now, I want to return to that energy circuit as we set up for our next short breathing meditation, because I'd like to imagine this active circuit circulating from, let's see, set my timer here. We're going to imagine, if you choose to join, that we have this oval of energy around our body, and with the in-breath, the energy, that energy of manifestation is circling down the front of our body, from the crown of our head down to the root of the pelvic floor. And on the out-breath, the energy circulates back up the back of the body, back to the crown chakra. So if you'd like to close your eyes now, if you choose to join this, we're going to witness the breath again. And with every in-breath, simply imagine the in-breath, the energy of the breath cycling down the front of your body until it reaches the pelvic floor. And with the out-breath, imagine the energy cycling up the back of the body. Simply witnessing the breath, not forcing it. With the in-breath, the breath energy cycles down the front of the body. With each out breath, the breath cycles up the back of the body to the crown. Bringing the attention back to the cycle of breath if the attention wanders. And I'll invite you now to open your eyes and rejoin the room. And what we're going to do now is go into breakout groups of 4, where, let's see, if Kathleen, I think you will put the cues in the chat. I'm simply inviting you to talk among yourselves, if you choose. Anything that arose for you during the talk, during the meditation, anything that feels like it would like to share. Any questions, comments, confusions, you can just hang out and be social if you like. But after, let's see, about 8 minutes, we will rejoin the large group and have a general discussion. So let's see if we can go into breakout groups now.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had fun in your breakout rooms. And I would like to invite a general discussion now, and we're going to cut it a little short because we ran a little over. But for the next 10 minutes or so, I would love to hear what came up for you collectively or individually. So you can either raise your hand by the on the Zoom function, or you can put a question into the chat box and one of the hosts will call on you. So I'm inviting comments, questions, unclarities, reactions.
Sandy, why don't you go ahead?
Sandy.
Yeah, my so many different things. What a great topic. And like we felt like we could have had another 20 minutes in the breakout room, and it was really getting interesting too. So appreciate that chance. For me, the question is, in terms of the cycle, there's that sense of manifestation into our unique being, right? My sandiness or whatever. My question is the role of Thanatos, because the aspect of bringing agape into this realm really feels like it's about being here in our material bodies. That's a big part of that. Mm-hmm. And one of the unique aspects of that is that it ends, that we die. That is an intrinsic part of the experience of bringing in agape into this manifestation. And the it didn't feel like that the way Thanatos was evoked was kind of going to that, but I'm curious about that in terms of that role in this process. I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. Interesting question. Big question. I'm going to just go real fast through these because I want to get as many people in these 10 minutes as possible. Freud spoke of Thanatos, Eros and Thanatos. When Ken Wilber revisited this whole subject, he actually broke it down further into 2 dualities. He paired Thanatos with agape, once you enter manifestation from the transcendent, you are in duality. That is part of the definition. That is the beginning of the entry of the transcendent into manifestation. You have a duality, yin and yang. Thank you. And so the other side, the dark side of the agape is the Thanatos, because that's bringing death. But for the Eros, Ken Wilber said that he paired it with phobos, which is the Greek for fear, phobic, fear. And the fear holds us back from the urge to transcendence. And the thanatos, the fear of death, is the contraction of the manifested being that is under the illusion that it is separate from the totality. The wave that is forgotten that it's water, it's forgotten it's part of the essence of the whole ocean, and has identified itself with the form, the outer shape of the wave, and it clings, its sense of self has identified with the form, the temporary form, and it struggles with the fear of death. That's a very quick, it's a big subject. That's kind of a quick, that's just a quickie answer. And you and I, we can chew on this more if we want to. I bet you and I could have a lot of fun with this. But begging your indulgence, let's move on. Does anybody else have anything they want to toss in the pot? Has this left everybody speechless?
I'll jump in on the deeper relationship with nature for me came up in that both are available at the same time, with that deeper relationship with nature, that it's uplifting and grounding at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. And this brings up for me again quickly, with all of the great meditative and contemplative traditions were articulated during the period of the traditional religions, pre-modernity, whether Eastern, Southern Asian, Western, what have you. And one of the features that seemed to be common to that stage of human civilization is such a profound drive toward the transcendence that there was a phobos about manifestation. The great, not so much in the Far East, but in India and in the West, there was a rejection of the world of immanence, of nature. You know, the world, the flesh, the devil, that was the Christian. And in my spiritual tradition, my spiritual teacher, Lynn O'Ryan here, was also in that. It was very world denying and very anti-embodied life. And this is an imbalance that I think we are still correcting here. And so I'm seeing an amazing, beautiful affirmation of the world of nature, of our embodied life, of the sacredness of the planet and of Earth and Gaia. And I love to see this. And we're still groping toward a balance here between a healthy balance between valuing the transcendent and the immanent. Yes, thank you. So let's see, Lynn, you had your hand up.
Yes, I got in late, so I didn't really get to share with my group, but I was thinking as you were talking about Eckhart Tolle and his consciousness, the twofoldness of that and the complexity and the evolving consciousness, and how that there's a flow there. And in the flow, we evolve through kind of like going through that flow and increasing in whatever, you know, if it's the knowledge, the power, the understanding, the what all wonderful stuff that we do get when we reenact, so to speak, and deepen, you know, our understanding. And also thinking about the ultimate time, when we go beyond time and space, which we experience here in this world, we don't have any understanding of going beyond time and space. We cannot imagine eternity. We cannot imagine, which would be, of course, going beyond time, and we can't imagine forever and beyond and beyond and beyond. So when we're talking about evolving consciousness, there's no end to how much evolution can occur at the level of eternity, which I find very exciting. And yes, when you're talking about the profound drive toward transcendence and how we are evolving, whereas when people died before, and I use that very tactlessly because people have these euphemisms, going beyond, or blah, blah, blah. But when we die, and we used to have funerals, and people would say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, and blah, blah. And they're focusing on how that person is gone, but no consciousness of where they've been and where they're going. And we've changed that from sort of a funeral consciousness where you wear black and so forth to a celebration of life, where we're recognizing what they've done so far. And I look forward to when we start recognizing where we're going toward.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
If I may say, I think we're going toward the ability to speak from these levels which are beyond time and space, and
Yes.
to realize the humble nature of at least this human experience, where I'm just having my eyes open to perhaps being able to speak from these levels. But
Yeah.
I gained some kind of experiential understanding of being in my group today that we can do that, but I'm also firmly grounded in the fact that I'm a humble human being, and I really appreciate. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Evolution
Thank you,
in
Sam.
action.
Yes, yes. This is something Ken Wilber has said. Our consciousness can expand indefinitely. And Lynn will remember the guru that we share would say, horizons and horizons and horizons will open before you. There's no limit to it. Ken Wilber said, the intellect, the rational intellect cannot go beyond a certain point.
Yeah.
But our consciousness can go. We cannot define these transcendent states, but we can experience them. And those who have experienced them can talk about them with each other, and they know what they're talking about because they've experienced them. So our aspiration is to experience more and more of them. And I saw one other hand up. I know we've come to the end of our time.
Ellen Davis had her hand raised. I want to make
Yeah,
sure
Ellen, I want to make space for you. Can we do this in a minute or so, Ellen?
I actually lowered my hand because I'm loving where the conversation has evolved since I first raised my hand. And I think I'd like to just let it flow from here without adding what I had to add at that time.
Very good. And maybe you'll have something further to add our next time through, because we're starting the second block now. And I was going to, let's see, I need to set my timer so that I don't go over, because I can, as my friends know, I can go on and on. So I have to be very disciplined to stay on a timeline here. So what I was going to do next was to kind of stick my neck out a bit and share an experience I had, not of the absolute transcendent, but an experience I had of what I call the cycle, why I think of it, of that flow, Eros and Agape, as an active energy cycle, like an electric circuit. When I was on retreat with my guru, who I share with Lynn O'Ryan, we've known each other since 1985. Wow. I was on retreat with our guru in 1994 at our retreat center in Oregon. And during that week and a half, I was in a different state of consciousness. I did not need to eat. I did not need to sleep for a week and a half. I think I slept maybe 2 hours a night. I didn't even feel like I needed to. I didn't need to eat at all, which is not normal for me. My entire life has been wrestling with compulsive overeating. It comes from my Slavic heritage. But during that week and a half, I think I ate about 400 calories a day, and that was only just so the people around me wouldn't notice that I wasn't eating. I have never felt better in my life. I was in the flow. I was in the zone. I would say blissful, intense, peaceful, and sometimes it was a little too intense, but it was the most wonderful week and a half of my life, bar none. I didn't need any of the medications that I usually use, like for my sinuses and this itis and that itis and my bursitis and my arthritis, and just none of that. Physical peak. Heat of day, cold of night did not affect me. I just wore the same shirt, pants, and overshirt day and night. And that for me is very unusual. I was effortlessly aware of the cycle I've been trying to describe abstractly and academically in the first block. Every moment, I was aware that the divine, the transcendent, is blasting all of manifestation into existence. And in that same instant, it's returning. I experienced as a cycle. I experienced it in terms of a sound energy, and that's specific to our spiritual path, Surachabd yoga. it's as if, and these are all metaphors because you cannot capture these experiences in words. So everything I say is a metaphor that if you push it too far is misleading. But it was, the closest I can come is to say that all of manifestation is like a symphony. A symphony orchestra, while it's playing, is manifesting this amazing complexity of sound that is, if it's a good composition, it's played well, is just grippingly beautiful, enchantingly beautiful. But it is manifesting in every moment. If that orchestra, if the musicians were to stop playing, the sound would cease. If the transcendent, if the great Tao were to stop flowing in any instant, in that instant, all of manifestation would cease to exist. It's an outflow and return. It's an active energy cycle in every moment, sustaining all of creation. Now, there are many, I've been chewing on that ever since 1994. Gosh, getting on for 30 years, over a generation. And I have to say, the experience lasted while I was on retreat with the guru. And this is guru yoga. This is being in the physical presence of a human being who has achieved God realization, if you want to call it that. I'm using the G word, substitute another word if you have baggage around the term God. But a human being who has achieved that transcendent state of consciousness is kind of like being in his or her presence is kind of like a tuning fork. He tunes us up. If we are at all receptive, our vibrations raise. And this again is a metaphor. But that experience I had because I was in his presence. It was not something I achieved. It was a gift. Now I had been doing my meditations all along. So there's a phrase that's been attributed to a number of people, that every great opening of consciousness is an accident, but by regular spiritual practice, we can make ourselves more accident prone, right? So I had been, doing all the things I agreed to do when I took the initiation from this guru, the vegetarian diet, and 2.5 hours of meditating a day. I was really doing it back then. So I'd been kind of holding up my end, and there's also a receptivity that's involved. It's like the flower opening. I'll get into that in a little bit. There's a receptivity, but the actual experience was a gift. I mean, this guru was somebody who had such powerful awareness himself. He could transmit experiences if he wanted to. And that was a gift from him. That's how I received it and how I interpret it. I was fortunate. At the end of that week and a half, it was time to go home. And over the next 4 days, I had a very gentle kind of off-ramp back into real life. I am very fortunate that I had been reading Ken Wilber all along. I started reading Ken Wilber's books in 1983, and I read each of his major books as it was published. So I had a lot of guardrails. I had a lot of outriggers on this canoe, keeping me steady. And also reading teachers like Ram Dass and Jack Kornfield of Spirit Rock. These alternate states are ultimately in the long run just another thing to let go of. Don't build your identity around it. That was from Ram Dass. Thank you, Ram Dass. Thank you, Jack Kornfield. Thank you, Ken Wilber. So when the retreat was over and I went home, and it was just kind of a very slow move from where I was back into ordinary consciousness. It was a very smooth and easy off-ramp. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes people who have these openings have real trouble getting back into their regular lives. There are people who have had experiences so profound that have lasted a long time, and then they build an identity around it and start teaching. And then when that goes away, they have to scramble to try to no, I can't let go of it. And then they start kind of making it up. There are all sorts of ways. These very powerful things, they're powerful. And as we learn to navigate our way through them, we learn how to handle them and how not to handle them. I was very lucky. I had some excellent teachers in addition to my guru. I'm very grateful to all of them. But that was, getting on, that was a long time ago. And I've been in a very ordinary state of consciousness most of the time ever since. But I have the memory of that. And so I have no doubt that there are transcendent states. Well, it's time to move on from that and segue. Oh, yes. I have heard this, the best descriptions I've heard of this are by Shinzen Young. And thank you, Chris Adams, for turning me on to Shinzen Young. I've been having a wonderful time listening to him. I've listed a couple of them in the bibliography that Kathleen will post at the end. I especially recommend God's Arrow, which is Shinzen Young talking about St. Teresa of Avila and that experience. I listened to that over and over again. And with that, I have to talk about the Gebser group, Jeremy Johnson's Gebser group, because the title of Gebser's massive tome that was so foundational for Ken Wilber's Aqual Metasynthesis, the title of his book is The Ever-Present Origin. I thought, okay, the origin is ever present. I'm going to have to read that someday. And then when I stumbled across Jeremy Johnson and his Gebser group, we've read The Ever-Present Origin. I've now read it through 3 times. I've had a wonderful time with that community. I highly recommend it. There's a link to that in my bibliography also at the end if anybody's interested. But one of the wonderful side benefits of being in Jeremy Johnson's Gebser community is that they had an online Gebser conference, I think a couple years ago. And 2 of the attendees were older German scholars who had known Gebser personally. And one of them, Professor Rudolf Hemmerle, had attended Gebser at the end of his life and toward his death. And they had had some very deep conversations. And Rudolf Hemmerle reported that shortly before he died, Gebser said to him, if you understand that the origin is ever present, you don't need to read my book. And I just about fell out of my chair because this is a massive tome and it just kind of goes through all of Western cultural history from the point of view of that transcendence, and is one of the major interpreters of our cultural history and so foundational for Ken Wilber's work. I'm not sure the aqual synthesis would be what it is without Gebser. At any rate, this is how all of these are coming together for me. And with this, I would like to move toward our next meditation by showing you an image of 2 flowers. Kathleen, is it possible to put those up now? Yes, these are flowers that bloom near my house. I think it's delightful they were blooming while I was preparing this presentation. These are my grounding metaphor for Eros and Agape. On the left are the cherry blossoms. And for me, I mean, I go into an altered state of consciousness when I look at these flowers on my walks. To me, the cherries symbolize the agape, the reaching out in absolute divine love into manifestation. And pink in let's see, theosophical color theory, pink, this kind of pink is the color of the divine love that pours itself, empties itself out into manifestation. So I'll just stand under these blossoms and look up and just zone out. My personal grounding metaphor for agape is the iris, and I love the color. To me, the iris is the agape. We are in manifestation, so we have a duality here. There are 3 petals that reach up, they strain up, they are reaching for the divine beloved, the ultimate beloved, reaching toward the heavens. The other 3 petals are wide open in surrender. And these are the 2 aspects, because we're in duality of the love, the eros, the love of the created being for the divine. And it's a back and forth between the reaching, the active reaching, and the open surrendering. And this I associate, Chris Adams, maybe we can talk about this, the shamatha versus vipassana meditations, the 1-point focus meditations versus the complete openness to this moment. So those are my 2 personal favorite images that help bring me to kind of a felt sense of the Eros and Agape. And with this, let's see, what time is it? Yes, it is time for our next meditation. We're only 2 minutes behind schedule. Good for us. So I'm going to set my timer, and I'm going to invite you, if you choose, to join me in our 3rd meditation. This time, we're going to take our breath up and down the center of our bodies. I like to imagine there's a column of light running up and down through the middle of my body. And this column of light runs from my crown of my head to the bottom of my pelvic floor. And I will invite you, if you choose, to maybe close your eyes or lower your eyelids and allow the breath to come and go in its own rhythm. And with the in-breath, that energy moves from the crown. As we draw in the breath, that draws in that energy from the crown to the root of the pelvis. And with the out-breath, the energy rises from the root to the crown. Each in-breath is the agape. Each out-breath is the eros. With that breath energy moving through the center of the body. Bringing the attention back to the breath if it wanders. Simply witnessing. This breath in this body. In this moment. And now I'd like to invite you to join us again. And again, we're going to go into breakout groups of 4, exactly the same question. Enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. Once again, this is the space to share, bring forth anything that you as an individual or a part of your group feels like you want to throw in the pot to share with the others, or if you have any questions or unclarities or things you want to pursue further. We have until about 10 minutes.
I'm not sure whether you're whether you're intending to be unmuted. There you go. I have a question, because I was remembering a comment from Richard Dawkins, I believe, that like in Amber on the spiral dynamics, that people tend to be able to hone this remote viewing sensibility of, say, doing something like standing on a beach and then knowing what's going on with the whales and the manta rays when they pay attention. So there's there's the rising and falling, and then there's the being aware of our own consciousness, and then being aware of the field in very particular ways. And I don't know whether I'm saying there's a directionality, but there's the Eros and Agape, and then there's the particular and the vast. I'm wondering.
Are you talking about sensing things? Where
our consciousness can be.
Yeah.
Because we're conscious of the rising and falling as we're here, particularly.
Yes, this is a nice big subject. Subtle energies. This is what I think I'm hearing, if I've understood you. there are, there are subtle energies. The hard science types and systems types, people who don't experience themselves, who are more objectively oriented, the stuff that tends to come across as woo-woo to, you know, more objective types. But the people who experience it know they're experiencing it. And there are many levels of subtle energies that, I'm going to get abstract here, that emanation out from the absolute. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit of my very complex thought structure. I like to imagine the absolute that pours itself into manifestation as existing in 8 dimensions, and that pours down through 7 dimensions, 6 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 4, and ultimately 3, Big Bang. And now there's 3 dimensions of space, time, matter, energy as we know it. But we exist on all those levels. We exist in all those dimensions. Our physical body is limited to physical senses that come from this 3-dimensional world. But those subtle energies pervade us. And we also have subtle bodies. And, you know, you could go into the theory, the theosophists go into this pretty lucidly. Actually, we have, you know, astral bodies, causal bodies, higher bodies. We have subtle bodies. This is kind of abstract by way of saying that so many people have different ways of perceiving these. And I know in this group, just those of you who I know a number of you are sensitive to some of these subtle energies. There's so many different ways for them to land in our awareness. Many different ways for them to land in our awareness, probably as many different ways as there are human beings on the planet. Some of us are more aware of them than others. Some of us, and I think of them, one of my ways of thinking about these is like bandwidths. Some of us are more tuned into certain bandwidths and not others, while other people are tuned into other bandwidths and not ours. So to perceive the way you were saying, Kathleen, that would be like one of those subtle energy bandwidths that you happen to be tuned into. There are people who see aura. There are people who are clairvoyant or clairaudient. There are people who have precognition or precognitive dreams. There's so many different ways of perceiving on these subtle energies, and we will be collectively and individually waking up to these more and more. We kind of squeezed it out as we focused on the intellect. We had to kind of narrow our bandwidth to develop the intellect. Now that our rational intellects are so developed, we are beginning, as we move into the integral era, to open out into some of these without losing what we've gained along the way. So I think I'll shut up now, and I see a whole row of hands. Let's see, Christine, I don't think, have you spoken yet? Why don't you go next, and then Sandy.
Thanks, Karen. I was wondering if you could address the feminine, masculine aspects, with Eros being a more masculine, it's thought of in terms of more masculine terms, and Agape is thought of in more feminine terms. Do you have any other thing to add about that?
Interesting question. Yes, I don't see Eros and Agape as specifically masculine and feminine. Where I go in Ken Wilber's meta system, which is my grounding system for all of this, I see the feminine masculine more as an expression of the duality between agency and communion. Agency, of course, being the out-thrusting masculine, communion being more the inclusive feminine, and that duality exists at every level of manifestation by definition, because it is a facet of being a holon, which for those of you who have any familiarity with Ken Wilber's system, every holon is a whole part. It is a separate entity into itself, and that is its agency. It is an agent. It is agentic, but it is also a small part of something larger. It's part of a community. And that's the communion. And so that polarity between agency and communion is one of those polarities. Everywhere you have a manifestation at any level of density or subtlety, you're going to have that polarity. In us human beings, in us, mammals, reptiles, the male feminine is one of the expressions of it. That's how I see it, Christine. Does that address what you were?
Yeah, I think that the agency and, kind of the receptivity, it's kind of the striving and the receiving.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and you could actually see that in the two of the classic Buddhist forms of meditation, the Vipassana versus the Shamatha, the one-pointed focus, which is very arrow-like, just versus the Vipassana, which is the experiencing, being totally open to this moment as it is, without rejecting, totally open. So you can yeah, totally receptive. So you could see that duality there too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandy.
Yeah, the question for me that arose is in terms of, given the concept of bodies, and then the evocation of your meditation was very much like not being in the body was like, yay.
Yay.
Yeah, but that's my question, is the role of the physical manifestation of our being in relationship to this dynamic. That it's interesting that in order to kind of grasp and understand it, we need, like, using flowers as a metaphor or a literal manifestation of it is one way to grasp it. And that feels like very resonant about, well, what's the role of the materialization? Us in physical bodies, there's, we have other bodies, but then we have this physical body as well. And I don't know whether in terms of what you were evoking is that, like, let's just get away from it, or we just haven't got a chance to explore that meaning. So very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And what are we doing with these bodies? Apparently, all this business of being embodied is the will of God. I'm using the G word for convenience. I mean, it is the will of that manifestation. And that was one of my realizations during that week and a half. Everything that exists, every subatomic particle in every nanosecond is the active will of God, because that transcendent pouring itself into existence is creating it in this moment. By definition, everything that exists is the will of God. Well, that's very nice when you're in this transcendent state of bliss and so on, but then you kind of land back in your normal life and you go, why is there all this suffering? And that's a whole other question. I got in my guru's face about that once. That's another story for another time. But it is now time for us to, thank you, Sandy. That is time for us to start block 3. And I will talk, hopefully not for more than 10 minutes here. I'll set my timer. And then we'll kind of go around this tube torus again with me presenting my ideas and images, and end with a reading by Wilber. And then again, we'll go into another 2-3 minute meditation, breakout groups and group discussions, and that should bring us to 6 o'clock. So I wanted to begin this block with a dream image I had that has, I dreamed this, I think sometime in the early 90s, but it's come back to me in recent years as another profound metaphor, a personal grounding metaphor. When I was an adult, but I was at a outdoor meeting in an elementary school, and they had this beautiful new kind of jungle gym. I mean, jungle gyms, those metal things from my childhood, but they had one for the children in the playground that was this big net, like the network in those old-fashioned sailing ships that the sailors would scramble up to furl and unfurl the sails. Well, they'd taken that kind of sturdy open net, and they'd erected 2 telephone poles, put a very sturdy crossbeam about 25 feet up, and thrown this net over it so you could climb up 35 feet. And oh man, I was up that thing up at the top, wishing I could climb even higher. I guess I was a sailor on a sailing ship back when those things happened, but I wanted to get up that. Every time I see a rigging like that, I want to be up as high as I can get. So in the dream version of that was I was on this net, and there was another net reaching down from the sky. But there was a gap of about 10, 12 feet between the earth net and the sky net. There was this gap. And the question was how to cross the gap, because of course I wanted to go all the way up. And then somehow in the dream, it seemed as if I was kind of at a distance. There was part of me that was on the earth net and part on the sky net, trying to figure out how to cross the gap. And so from the earth net, I mean, if I had some threads or something, or some string I could throw, if I had a rock, I could throw it up and maybe hook it over, and we could haul some ropes up from the ground and kind of make the connection and draw the ropes. Or if the part of me, because I couldn't, it was far too far to jump up. But then the part of me that was on the sky net looking down, thinking, I could jump down. I wanted to go down, but there was that gap, and I thought, well, if I jump, I'm sure I'm agile enough to catch the net, but I might get my arm or a leg caught, and I could break my arm or leg. I could injure myself very badly. So how are we going to bridge the gap from the earth net moving up and the sky net coming down? That was the conundrum in the dream. This image has returned to me in recent years as kind of a grounding metaphor for what we who are on spiritual paths are trying to achieve. We're trying to bridge that gap. When we bridge that gap, we human beings, Homo sapiens, and this is my sense now, I'm sharing with you. Our assignment now, as we bridge that gap, is that we become the channel through us where the divine agape meets the divine eros, and we become channels for divine wisdom reaching down into this earth. And we can consolidate a culture that will carry us on sustainably and healthy, and become divine, godly stewards for this earth. You know, the traditional religions have some very healthy, in their healthy aspects, are very aware that humanity is a steward for this earth. The earth is a gift of God, and we are to be stewards of this earth. And our task now, in this integral era that we are striving to bring about, we can become channels for that divine energy moving up and down through us, and healing the earth, healing ourselves, healing our culture. So that's one of my wacko ideas. And I guess I will share a little bit of my origin story. Lynn Orion, who's here with us today, has been on my spiritual path with me. We have the same guru, Guru Yoga. We were very fortunate. Guru Yoga is powerful. When you are in the presence of a human being who is God realized, it affects our consciousness. Those of us in the circles around Ken Wilber, at least, are very aware of some of the dark sides of Guru Yoga. It is very powerful. So when it goes off the rails, it can go very powerfully off the rails. And some of you know all sorts of stories. Lynn and I were fortunate. Our guru was the real thing. He was a very humble man and totally sincere. His name is Takar Singh, by the way. Surat Chab Yoga is the path. He was, however, from a very conservative, traditional background. He grew up in a remote village in India, very poor by our standards. He was the first person in his village ever to read or write. His personality was, we would consider him extremely socially conservative. And so the personality of the guru does have an effect. And I have to say, I am so grateful for Ken Wilber, because I had been reading Ken Wilber all along, almost as soon as I was initiated 40 years ago on this spiritual path. I had like this powerful outrigger on my ocean-going canoe. Reading Ken Wilber, I was aware that you can have a God-realized human being, but his personality is going to affect how that absolute transcendent consciousness is going to express itself in his life and his teaching. And it helped with the fact, it helped too that on our path, our gurus, that there's a lineage, and they all said, don't take our word for anything. Don't take anybody's word for anything just because they say, see for yourself, test, find out. This has worked for me. I hope it works for you. And I will help you in any way I can. And the experience of love, of the real agape, the divine love pouring forth from this human being was unmistakable. However, there were a few things that were, definitely aspects of his pre-modern personality. And because I'd been reading Ken Wilber all along, and a few others like Ram Dass and so on, I was able to make the discernment when it was time to be absolutely receptive and totally open, and when it was time to say, well, I see it differently. If you want me to accept what you're telling me, you're going to have to show me. And I was able to steer my way through a number of things. It was never a problem so much while my guru was alive. He left the body in 2005, although I ended up in positions of responsibility in his organization. I kind of ran part of his organization for a while, both organizationally and spiritually, and dealing with people from other traditions. In California, we've got people from all over the world, and I had to be a spiral wizard, for those of you who are familiar with spiral dynamics. I mean, I had to be able to deal with people who were at magic purple, who were at amber blue, who were green, who were at others. And I had to be able to meet them where they were and connect with them. And because I had been reading Ken Wilber all along, that was, I was just able to make that work. And after our guru left the body and under the successors, things went in a direction I didn't particularly want to go. I will just summarize, because we're running out of time here, that if it had not been for Ken Wilber, certain events in my life would have absolutely devastated me. But because I had been reading Ken Wilber all along, and especially when he came out with his Aqual model, I was able to cognize and understand and metabolize events in my life that would have devastated me if I did not have that map. It's just a map. That's a map. And I've said, as I've said before in this group, for the territory we are entering, we want the best goddamn maps we can get. And I don't think there is a better than Ken Wilber's. I don't think there could possibly be one. It needs a lot of fine tuning yet. It's a work in progress. But I just want to say that I have so much reason to be grateful to Ken Wilber. Thank you, Ken Wilber. Thank you, Ken Wilber. Thank you, Ken Wilber. I would not be who I am today without the beauty and wisdom of your leadership, of what you brought to us. And with that, so that, yes, I was able to navigate the dark side of Guru Yoga without capsizing. So thank you, Ken Wilber. And I would like to finish this block before we go into our last meditation and breakout groups by reading from Ken Wilber's second massive tome, The Religion of Tomorrow. And this is the last chapter in The Religion of Tomorrow, where he's talking about the next world order that's coming on, second tier. I mean, this is more than just another transition to a new world order, but that again is a whole separate subject. He's talking about the incoming world order. And he says, you are engaged in one of the most monumentally progressive movements that has ever been seen in history. It is a certainty. This is a level that is already laid down in the cosmos, capital K. It is laid down in history as a stage headed our way. It's in the mail. Its delivery cannot be halted. It is a tsunami that is today still thousands of miles offshore, but it's headed in this direction and nothing can stop it. And what can you do to bring this historical revolution about right now, this moment? Every time you think an integral thought, every time you conceive an integral idea, every time you reach out for a future that is even just a little more whole than the one today, you are yourself directly, immediately, and irrevocably building interior integral objects that are instantly being stored in the real cosmos. And I'll take a parenthesis and say this is one of those subtle levels that is absolutely real. You are adding a few inches to the size of that tsunami racing in our direction now. Welcome to your place in history. And I will add, he wrote that. Yes, there goes Tom. He wrote that, when did he write that? Not that long ago. But that tsunami that he said was 1,000 miles off, it's landing now. Its waters are rising around our ankles. In the apocalyptic events we read about in our headlines, this is the transition. Transitions are always periods of turbulence, but this is the next new world order coming in. It is landing, and we are part of the guiding of the leading edge. So I think with that, it is now time to go into our last meditation and then breakout groups and group discussions, and we're almost on time. Wow. So I'll set my timer. And for the last meditation, I invite you, if you wish, to imagine that same column of light or energy or whatever through the center of your body. This time it doesn't stop at the top of your head. It shoots all the way up to the core of the galaxy. And The bottom of it does not end at the root of the pelvis. It goes all the way down to the core of the earth. So with every in-breath, you are drawing that breath energy from the center of the galaxy, the center of your body, down to the core of the earth with each in-breath. And with each out-breath, it goes all the way from the core of the earth to the center of the galaxy. So I will invite you, if you have not done so yet, to close your eyes or lower your eyelids. And withdraw the attention from everything else to focus on this breath in this body. Every in-breath starts at the core of the galaxy and shoots down through your body to the core of the earth. Every out-breath starts at the earth's center and shoots up through your body to the core of the galaxy. The divine love pour shooting from the core of the galaxy down through your body to the center of the earth. The divine Eros returning with your out-breath from the core of the earth, shooting up through you to the center of the galaxy. Returning the attention to the breath if the attention strays. And now I will invite you to open your eyes if you've closed them. And once again, we'll go into our breakout groups if you choose to, with exactly the same cue that Kathleen has posted. And we'll do this for about maybe only 5 minutes because we've run a little over. Back again. Okay, so did this exercise leave everyone speechless? Anybody have anything they want to throw into the pot at this point?
Well, I was completely out of control and I admitted it. What I mean to say is it was a very powerful exercise for me because I felt the energy, going from the universe down to the core of the earth. But me absolutely running the energy, it had nothing to do with, I had no control over it. And Karen, I'm a bit of a control freak, so
no,
enjoy being out of control. And I don't mind admitting it. But I could feel the energy absolutely going. It's just, I wasn't running it. My breathing I was doing the breathing, and I was doing the visualization, but they had no relationship to each other. I could just feel the energy going. It was not matching up with my breathing. It was just doing its own thing, and I was just barely hanging on for the ride.
Wow.
It was wonderful.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I was, I actually had some qualms about doing these meditations because for the reasons I said at the beginning. I don't think in these short, not even 3-minute meditations, anybody's Kundalini is going to rise or anything. But energies can arise during meditations. And for Lynn, this isn't for the rest of you. Lynn and I, our guru, he just wanted, as I said in my breakout group, our guru wanted us to start by getting out of the body, have nothing to do with the body, have as little to do with the body as you can. The only positive thing to do with the body is leave it. Don't focus on the breath. So I'm kind of have a little bit of a guilty conscience toward my guru, but I know he loves me about doing this. So that's very interesting to hear from my longtime friend and colleague, Lynn, because she comes from the same tradition I do.
When I studied Kundalini before I got into meditation, the first thing we learned was how to turn it off. And that became a very valuable thing for me. That way at least you're in control, because I have a friend who actually went into a coma with being so excited with the Kundalini. She didn't have to sleep. She didn't have to eat. She just whee until she burned out and went into a coma for 3 months.
Yeah. These subtle energies are real and they can be dangerous. If you want to, anybody, this is my advice to people who want to work with these, go to people who really know what they are doing. I have carefully preserved my ignorance of these subtle energies. I'm so glad other people do them and know that we're doing. But my core meditation will always remain the one I learned from my guru. And I'm just kind of having a little fun being naughty on the edge here. Let's see.
I'm glad I learned that to know what to avoid.
Yeah. Let's see.
Or stop. Or control,
I see Sandy's hand up. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken yet who would like to go before we call on Sandy again? Anybody else? Take it away, Sandy.
Well, I've got to bookend all my comments here and just say, I'm glad that, what did you say? Whatever you were transgressive about the dynamic of your guru, because, I have a theme that I've raised here, but it was really interesting to have the experience of, going into our bodies, and when you're breathing, you're in your body, to evoke a lot of what you were talking about. So yay for your transgression in terms of, pushing against that, because it feels really important. I mean, the work that we're doing and the energetics and the goals that we have, that being in our body and being on the earth and and awareness of the earth feels like a really important piece of this transition.
Yes.
And so yay for doing the meditations. It felt like it's like the viscerality, not talking about things, just talking about things, but actually embodying it. So thank you for pushing beyond your boundaries, for your soul yoga. So I'm glad we could be part of that. Thank you.
Yes, I always enjoy playing with the edge a little bit. Yes, but this is our assignment now, is to balance all of these factors somehow. And we are on the cusp. Ken Wilber had a lot to say about the second tier. And he said, this isn't just another new world order that's coming online. And by the way, since we have a little extra time, because I messed up my timeline, so we have a little extra time, I have a spreadsheet that charts out the previous 6 eras of human history, aligning Ken Wilber's genius in Up from Eden, where he aligned Piaget with Gebser, with individual cognitive development, aligning it with the eras of human civilization. And there are people who find that anathema, but when I read Up from Eden in 1983, I was still just finishing my PhD in cultural history, and suddenly everything I already knew made so much more sense. Jeff Saltzman has talked about this too. It was like mind-blowing. It's like suddenly, as if I had been seeing in 2 dimensions all along, and now I'm seeing in 3. And I see everything in relationship to everything else in much profounder ways. Or it's like a jigsaw puzzle. You've got the edges finished and you've got a chunk here and a chunk here. And suddenly you see how all the chunks fit together and you fill in all the other pieces. And that was back in 1983. And I've been living with this and metabolizing it ever since. And on that basis, I felt like I had some grounding to disagree with my guru, this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful human being who radiated divine love, always. Actually, he yelled at me twice, but both of those were those are other stories. They were he and I both knew what he was doing, and it was to achieve some other goal. He was actually yelling at other people through me. But I felt like I had some grounding with Ken Wilber to disagree with my guru about his view, because he insisted that we are going to a golden age. There's the next golden age coming very soon on this planet, but he had that profound intuition, but he interpreted in terms of his own personality. Said all technology will disappear. Every human being will be God realized, and plants will grow. We won't even need to do agriculture. We'll live like people did back in the earliest days of humanity, when we were one with nature and no technology, and it'll be returned, and we'll get rid of all this mental stuff and all this thing. And I just never bought that. And that was because I, like when I was around my guru, I was wide open, but there was that part of me that'd say, well, I'm just going to bracket that and set it aside. And I've come to see a lot of things very differently than my gurus saw them. And yet the core of that essence that he transmitted is absolutely real. And so I'm very grateful, because it was mostly Ken Wilber who enabled me to make those subtle but profound discernments and kind of kept me from going off my own rails. Anybody else?
I just want to make a note that I did put Karen's bibliography in the chat for anybody to upload that document. And Karen and I were talking when we were preparing for this, one thing because she was talking about her degree in history, and it seems like people that know how history works and develops, and that trend with all the things Ken Wilber is aware of, are the best able to say, look at current trends and maybe make novels or science fiction novels about where things are going.
Yes.
And I recommended a science fiction writer called Ada Palmer who says that. But so that's like, this can really be a tool for our imaginations to ground them with this awareness of where we've been and what really makes sense with the things we're talking about.
Thank you. Yes, and that's another point. Because I have such a detailed knowledge of history, I see a trajectory. And this is something Jim Rutt from Game B says. He's kind of a lower, integral lower right. One single trajectory doesn't have much predictive value, but when you get a whole bundle of trajectories and they're all going in the same way, you can make some robust predictions. I do not freak out about current events, because I have my historian's knowledge of what we've come from, what we've come up through, how we've come up through it. What we're going through now, we have seen this movie 6 times before. We know how it ends. It ends in a next new emergent world order. And I have some idea of the outlines, and this is thanks mostly to Ken Wilber, of some general ideas of the potentials of the next new world order, and it is exciting. And I think with this is a time for me to close with a final Ken Wilber quote. And this is a continuation. After he talked about his tsunami, that tsunami is landing. The integral world order is already entering. It's why things are so turbulent now. He goes on to invite us to envision this integral world of the near future, quote, close to the fullness of being and the freedom of emptiness, where all sentient beings are treated with dignity, care, concern, and loving kindness, where people find the divine in their own deepest self and see spirit unfolding in every detail of the world around them, where transhumanism means not the end of flesh, but its radiant transmutation into supermind forms of gorgeous beauty etched into the cosmos. Wilber's vision of our near future. And so I think at this point, we do whatever ending procedures our wonderful tech hosts who've managed this so superbly. And I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Karen. And I think at this point, what we would like to do is thank Karen for a wonderful presentation and, just great work. And as always, the breakouts are wonderful to touch base with folks. So at this point, with those thanks to Karen, we will move from the formal part of the meeting to our social time. So if anyone has to leave, thank you for being here. Thanks for coming. be sure to check out SanDiegoIntegral.org, and we'll be posting next month's and future months information as soon as that's available. But if you have to drop off now, have a good evening or night or morning or wherever you are. And we'll move on to the informal session here. And for tonight, we're going to start that informal session with Karen has, I believe you have a poem that you're going to read, and that'll just kind of be a start to the discussion. And then for this part, if it's not busy or whatever, just unmute and you can speak. But if we start to get people backed up, using the raise your hand button is a great way to do it. And just put yourself in the queue, and then we'll just call on people in order. But it's just informal. No real rules here. So Karen, if you'd like to go ahead with that, the poem you wanted to read, we'll start the informal part of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for coming. This is, it was fun putting it together. I stressed about all the tech stuff a bit, but this wonderful tech team handled all that. So this has been, I've had a lot of fun with this. Thank you all for playing with me. This is The Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. The Dark Night of the Soul, as we do our shadow work, that's a whole other big thing. We need to be doing our shadow work as we go. We've got a lot of shadow work from our history, individually and collectively. The Dark Night of the Soul is part of that, and it's become a profound metaphor, and it's entered the mainstream, I'm glad to say. The Dark Night is basically when, as we make our personal transitions, we die to who we were in order to become who we're going to become. This is taken from a Spanish mystic from the Baroque era, St. John of the Cross. He was a friend of and a collaborator of St. Teresa of Avila. These were some of the most ascetic people who ever lived. And yet his poem, his book about the Dark Night of the Soul, which is the foundation for what we understand about the Dark Night of the Soul, is a spin-off from a poem he wrote about his own spiritual experience. And the book, The Dark Night of the Soul, is only about that first part where he enters the dark night. And I'm going to read the poem. This was part of my dialogue with Layman Pascal because it is erotic, like one of St. Teresa of Avila's experiences. I don't think we can avoid the erotic part of Eros. There is an Eros at every level. And I think we should embrace it, include it, work through the places where we're stuck, include and transcend. So this is the poem written by one of the most austere people who ever lived. See if, I know I'm always breathing a little harder at the end of it. He says, on a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, oh, happy chance, I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder, disguised, oh, happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. In the happy night, in secret, when none saw me, nor beheld I aught, without light or guide save that which burned within my heart, this light guided me more surely than the light at noonday to the place where he, well I knew who, was awaiting me, a place where none appeared. Now, as an aside, those of you who have done a lot of meditating will recognize this is the experience of meditating and leaving your body to a place where none appeared. He's beyond duality. I mean, he is talking about meditation experiences, but that's only the first half of the poem. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed into the beloved. Upon my flowery breast, kept wholly for himself alone, there he stayed sleeping, and I caressed him, and the fanning of the cedars made a breeze. The breeze blew from the turret. As I parted his locks, with his gentle hand he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on my beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. It's like, I don't know. I'm probably not the only one who's breathing a little harder there. I mean, and yet this was a completely transcendent experience. And the basis for a good deal of our later Western spirituality. And I think a number of you are probably familiar with that famous statue by Bernini of the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. There's the ecstasy of being completely gone in meditation, and he expressed it in very erotic terms. So much me. That's a little gloss on the term eros. And so, okay, I'm putting down the talking stick. Regis.
When I was first listening to that, I'm reminded of the section from the prophet of the coming of the ship. And he was talking about, shall my desires flow like a fountain that I may fill their cups? Am I a harp that the hand of the mighty may touch me, a flute that its breath may pass through me? A seeker of silences am I, and what treasure have I found in silences that I may dispense with confidence? And then he goes in to further say, if this indeed be the hour in which I lift up my lantern, it is not my flame that shall burn within. Empty and dark shall I raise my lantern, and the guardian of the night shall fill it with oil, and he shall light it also.
Oh, thank you.
And that seemed, in some sense, like a teacherly way of expressing that connection with, from the silence out to the group that is assembling and to talk to him.
Thank you. And yes, somebody mentioned in the chat that it sounds like Rumi. Yes. Rabindranath Tagore. I mean, you could go example after example after example from so many traditions, where the most profound expression they can find is something that feels erotic. It's eros. And if you want an amazing experience, in my bibliography, I believe I've included the clip of Shinzen Young, who is one of he has done all of those Buddhist meditations. He reads this poem, actually he recites it, and he does it like a Zen master, sitting in the Zendo, where you go in for your formal meditation, and the Zen, and you go up and you bow to the Zen master, the Roshi, and he's looking at you with that absolute one-pointed attention. Shinzen Young reads this poem like he's a Zen master. He's looking into the camera like that. I mean, talk about pew, one-pointed, and he recites it from memory, line by line in Spanish, and then he translates it into English in Spanish, and he's doing it as a Zen meditation. It's like, that's an experience. I highly recommend it.
So in one of our breakout groups, when we were doing the Agape and Eros breathing out, Agape breathing in, I shared the screen of Botticelli.
Oh, yes.
And Ellen Davis pointed out, look at the male, he's breathing out Eros, yes, and the woman's breathing in Agape.
Wow.
I don't know if Botticelli deliberately did that, but it's so in alignment with what we're talking about. And, how Eros later on, transforms into the higher things. But I had never noticed that. Well, until we did this exercise.
Wow, that's a good point. Who pointed that out again?
Ellen.
Ellen, okay. Yes, because I mean, Botticelli actually would have, because there was a huge upsurge of Neoplatonism in Florence at the time, and Rome in Italy of the Renaissance. So, and Botticelli was really into the whole Neoplatonic, and he hung out with the philosophers and so on. So he would have been aware of Plato's and the Neoplatonist formulations. So that was probably deliberate.
So my question is, what's going on with that woman on the right? All of our attention is on Eros and the woman and the woman that's receiving that energy, but nothing is being said about the woman on the right. And she's there for a reason. Botticelli had some thought about it. What's she doing and why is she there? What's her, what's happening to her?
It's been a long time since I was an art historian, and she's bringing a garment for Venus. This is Venus arising from the half shell. This is Venus. This is he's doing a Neoplatonic interpretation of an ancient Greek Roman myth. This is the first appearance of Venus, the archetypal energy of love, Eros, and divine love. Right. And abundance. And so she's being born from a seashell, and that the figure on the right is clothing her, and what the hiding her. Well, in garbing her. Venus has just been born, so of course she's naked, but so what the significance of that robe is that she's about to be wrapped in, I have no idea.
So there's no judgment about how you shouldn't be naked and blah blah blah, and Eros is a bad thing.
No, not all. This was a good thing. It was beautiful. I mean, they were embracing it. What they did in the Renaissance with antiquity was interesting, but that's a whole art history and cultural lecture. No, this was, they were coming out of the Middle Ages. It's called the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. And these people were consciously trying to revive the world of ancient antiquity. They saw that as the right way. And so this was a positive. It had all sorts of metaphysical connotations for these Neoplatonists. It was entirely a positive image. And they also, the beauty of the human body was something that they were embracing from antiquity. The body had been something shameful and covered up during the 1300 years of Christian history. And now they're rediscovering the beauty, the glories of antiquity. And I'm going to, since I don't see any hands up, I'm just going to keep on talking for a little bit here. This is something we all do collectively, individually, is when the next new era is emerging. And this was modernity just beginning to emerge out of the Middle Ages, the next new world order. As the next new set of values and ideas and customs, values that we've never had before, ways of seeing the world that we've never had before, when these are just starting to form in the collective awareness. Collectively, we project it back onto a much older era, not the era just passed, but a much older era that we romanticize a bit, because this is how we learn everything, by projecting. And this gets into Freud and projection and so on. But everything we learn individually, collectively, as it crosses the threshold from pre-consciousness into consciousness, it crosses that threshold by first projecting into something we see in the world out there. And then we say, oh, that's really me. We re-own the projection. We do this individually all the time. We see some quality in somebody out there that either really attracts us or really irritates us. Then if we mature, we say, oh, well, that's really in me. I have to own that. We do that collectively, culturally. And when we are starting to move into the next world order that is just emerging collectively, we project these new values and new ideas onto a distant past that we romanticize. And so in the Middle Ages, as modernity was just starting and we're revaluing the human body, we're revaluing the archetypes, they projected it onto the world of antiquity and said, oh, the Middle Ages, that was just this dark period that nothing much happened. Well, I was a medievalist, a lot happened in the Middle Ages. But as the next new world order comes on, it collectively projects onto a distant past. And that's how we start to become conscious of these whole new values. And that's what we're doing now. As I see a lot of just a projection onto our very distant past as hunter-gatherers and maybe agriculturalists. Oh, back when people knew how to live, back in the days of hunter-gathering. I mean, there's a fashion now in some circles to say that agriculture was the worst mistake humanity ever made. I don't buy that. No, I'll take my central heating and thank you very much. But there are some values that we are collectively emerging. Sustainability. Wow. I mean, we've got some big issues in our faces, and we are collectively creating a new set of values and new ways of operating in the world, and it's being projected onto a distant past. And that's the positive side. The negative side is the regressive move that wants to kind of turn time backwards. And, that's a case for discernment. Anyway, so I've been rambling a while, but if anybody else has anything to throw into the pot here, I'd love to hear it. Have I reduced you all to silence? I see a finger raised. Lorraine?
Yes. Yeah. it's interesting what you're saying about projecting onto a distant past. With everything that's going on in Ukraine, you know, I've been reading Ann Applebaum and Tim Snyder, and they both converge on this idea that it can be really dangerous to get nostalgic about a past that never actually existed.
That's the dark side.
And Tim Snyder particularly talks about how this vision, and it struck me, I was made mindful of it when you were talking about Ken Wilber's vision about the oncoming tidal wave of amazing, you know, growth and this idealized thing of, you know, something really wonderful is coming. That I wonder if holding on to that thought wouldn't stop people from acting in the present because they have this sort of vague certainty that everything's going to be okay. If it might not get in the way of what they need to do. It's kind of like, you know, the Ukrainians are suffering for all of us now.
Yes.
And if it weren't for them, democracy would probably evaporate. You know, it's that dire. It's that dire. And I just wonder about these visions about a future, you know, an inevitable, marvelous future, what that does to people. And I don't really know, you know, maybe it just gives tremendous comfort to allow them to keep acting in the world, and it prevents them from giving up entirely. But I think it's something to consider, you know.
Yes, excellent point, and a very important one. And this is the case for careful discernment here. I don't think democracy is as fragile as you do, but I think we are in a time of grave turmoil. Now, as I analyze history as a historian, and this gets back to that chart I drew up of the various ages. Every time a new era comes online, there tends to be a period of breakdown. We tend to see them as dark ages.
Yeah.
And this is part of that larger trajectory. If you look at the whole big history, the whole history of the universe, we see in physics, it's called phase changes, where say water is going from one state to another, from a solid to a liquid. There are long periods of where things are more or less the same, but then as the phase change happens, there's a lot of volatility. And then it enters once it's all liquid, then it's all liquid. In geology, there are long periods of stability and then short periods of extreme cataclysmic change. In biology, this is punctuated equilibrium. There are long periods of more or less, where the change is incremental, just slow, but then there are periods of extreme turbulence, like the 5 great extinction events on this planet. And yes, we're looking at maybe a 6th, but I will point out, here's the thing, the next new emergent order of complexity, going all the way back to the Big Bang, the next new order of complexity emerges through these periods of great turbulence. Now, the next order of complexity doesn't necessarily always emerge. Sometimes it goes back to the previous era. But if you go back to the Big Bang, 13.82 billion years ago, that's a long track record of periods of more or less stability, then very short periods of great turbulence, and then the next new order of complexity emerges. This pattern is repeated in the physiosphere, the geosphere, the biosphere, and in human history. In human history, these periods of change, we tend to experience them as dark ages. Now, sometimes you can get into these cycles like the Chinese Empire was in for 2,500 years, where you have stability and then turmoil, and then you go back to the old form of stability. The emperor, is the link with the heavens, and then the dynasty kind of winds down. There's a rebellion, then there are warring warlords, and everything's horrible, and then there's the next new emperor. You can get into periods where you just cycle through the same cycles, but then the next new order when the next new order of complexity starts emerging, old systems break down under the stress. And in human history, I'm going to get a little into the weeds. The next, as I've identified them, the next new order of complexity tends to be sparked, those periods of turmoil tend to be sparked by a new development in communications technology. In our case, whether it's language, writing, printing press, radio, television, the internet, and now social media.
AI.
And this is it, chatbots. Oh my God. That's why I say the tsunami is rising around our ankles. And this is to your point, Lorraine, there is no guarantee that we will pull this off. It could just break down, and then kind of things stabilize at the old level. There is no guarantee. And so my approach is twofold. One is, I don't think it's quite as dire as you said. I don't think democracy is going to disappear. I don't think humans are going to disappear. However, it's dire. I mean, we need our A game here. We are challenged to be the best we possibly can be. But if we pull this off, look at the track record. 13.82 billion years of history. Why would we assume that evolution would stop with us? Eventually, some civilization somewhere, maybe even not on this planet, someone somewhere will eventually, there will be a next new emergent order. Why would we think evolution would stop with us? But we have a shot at this now. And so what I'm hoping with my message, with my general messages, and my hope is to take the edge off of the desperation that allows us to engage with the world and engage from a position of discernment, not desperation, and wisdom, the wisdom, connecting with the higher wisdom instead of blame, judgment, blame, resentment. And this is where some of the Buddhist teachings come in. So if we can connect with our wiser selves, if we can dispel the cloud of fear that wants to eat at us, eat our brains, if we can dispel that, connect with our wiser selves, boy, what becomes possible? What becomes possible? And this is not just, and here now I'm going to get my crazy visionary side. This is not just a next new order of humanity. It's not just the seventh stage. This is Ken Wilber's second tier. This is bigger than that. This is a whole new order. We have gone through the physiosphere, the physical universe, the geosphere, the planet, the biosphere, life on this planet, the noosphere. That's a term Ken Wilber took from Teilhard de Chardin, where our intellects come online and we have created all our technology. Now we are going into the theosphere, if we pull this off, where the divine wisdom is flowing through us in a way that we can be wise stewards of the planet. This is possible. We can pull it off. We have everything we need to do it if we can kind of stay centered and move through, and don't either just give up out of apathy, say, oh, it's hopeless, or go crazy with our blame, looking for someone to blame and go out and make things worse. If we can kind of keep on a central course here, if we pull this off, what becomes possible? And that can be fun thinking about. But right now, we have some urgent things to deal with on our plate.
Yeah, I'm troubled. I was having discussions. I was there's this new book out. It's called Wild in the World, but it's about this whole North American continent and its experience with animals. There were so many billions here. There was billions of passenger pigeons, yes, and like 24 million buffalo, and now 0 passenger pigeons. And this book was putting a little bit in it that I hadn't heard of before from what's the name of the Lewis and Clark expedition. There, like, some of the people on that were like walking, and one of the hunters, they'd come across, he was just walking one way and a wolf walked the other way on the path. And he just bayoneted the wolf because he could. And like where we are right now, I'm aware that we're so much, like, we can look back and say, oh, that's horrible. Like, a passenger pigeon flock would go by for more than 24 hours and leave 12 inches of guano on the ground. But and we say, oh, we wouldn't do that, but what are we doing to our atmosphere? And I'm feeling like we can be as much about in a different consciousness. You know, I was in the meditation and feeling like a connection with the furthest galaxies that the Hubble is doing. But it seems like as long as there's somebody in blue or whatever that's is the same kind of person that would have bayoneted a wolf, they're the ones that are in the Capitol breaking windows. I like being aware of how many levels of consciousness there are at any one time is not making me feel more hopeful. So I don't know what other people are thinking about, like if we're aware of people being at beige and purple and orange and blue and what they're likely to do. I mean, I'm wondering, like, as much as I've put solar panels on, like.
Well, just to chime in, maybe.
Please.
So
other people, feel free to jump in.
So this bringing up this notion of AI, right, to what you're describing, Kathleen, to empathize with people that don't act in ways that we would discern as more or less whole. People who are optimistic about large language models, they talk about it in terms of it being a tutor. And in that sense, it's a highly available tutor, right? And it's this idea that we can create systems where people can naturally express their goals and get tutoring for it. So when it comes to things like conservation, resource management, and things like that, it would enable us to have natural resonance points where before the heinous act, before the thing that we think breaches any sense of holarchy, there can be highly available coaching for people to, you know, like you were saying, before they get into that sense of fear that may constrict their sense of possibilities, right? And to basically have this sense of highly available intervening where people can explore within their own sense of the world what's possible. And I think it's incredible, but I don't think it's necessarily, we have to, I think in terms of like that way of using large language models, there's a cultural component to that. It's this idea of when you have conversations with large language models, are you sharing those conversations with other people, or are you using it to challenge the way that you think and really explore possibilities? But the thing about it is, it's highly available. I mean, the usage rate of people using large language models to kind of have this interaction where I think it's kind of crazy how you can take an idea that's kind of half-baked, right, and put in a large language model and feel like you can get this sense that, oh, it's tracking what I mean. And the potential of that for a lot of people to kind of develop, like from the level of intuition and a hunch, to kind of have an interaction and then bring that. But the thing that I would want to see is they bring that from a hunch, strengthen it, and then bring it into dialogue with their community, with other people. And I think that's a new current for education. That's a new current for like lifelong education. I'm optimistic about that. Yeah,
I am too, actually, although it's certainly staggering with the chat GPT and so on. Oh my, I haven't wrapped my mind around it yet, but I'm going to be addressing it with my writing. What I would say is as we hopefully are kind of those of us who identify at higher levels, what we can do to reach out to people who are doing damage individually or in the world is use our understanding of stages. And we had this conversation on a forum with Namali Pereira and Jeff Saltzman to see where people are coming from, meet them where they are, and help figure out if they are doing damage. Why are these people not thriving? And help them thrive at their level. Because if people are happy and thriving, they are not trashing their environment. The people who invaded the Capitol are in deep, deep, deep existential distress. We can use our mental maps of the stages to help reach out. And this is, I'm talking from nonviolent communication. And Jeff Saltzman came up with a beautiful summation. We were talking about stages and the whole stage theory debate. And what he came up with was, we use stages as portals to authentic connection with other peoples and cultures. if we can use our understanding at our level to reach people to where they are and do what it takes, help them thrive wherever they are and not feel like we need to improve them. If they are thriving, they're not going to be trashing the Capitol. Anyway, that's just I see some hands, so let's go. Eric, hi. You muted.
There we go. There we go. Okay. Hi, Karen. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Eric.
Yeah, I'm loving this discussion. Thank you so much. And appreciating a lot of the points were just brought in. I'm trying to, in real time, think how to weave this. And Lorraine, thank you very much for the side that you were bringing in. Because one thing I'm wondering, and I don't know if I can loop it all together, but also recognizing, Johan, what you brought in about the AI. I was on a webinar about AI this morning, as a matter of fact, for 6 hours. And so a lot of that's stirring for me right now. But I'm curious, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are, that insight. And how we have dialogue with people who are seeing the world so differently. And what was coming up, Lorraine, as I listened to you, as I was thinking, Margaret Wheatley has a new version of her book, Who Do We Choose to Be, that's coming out in June. And so she's kind of like rewritten that. And, just recognizing her as someone who has a pretty comprehensive, worldview with complexity, has written a ton of books and all of that. And so I have respect for that. I don't necessarily, see everything the same way, but I'm trying to say, how would what you're bringing here, Karen, how would you have a dialogue with Meg Wheatley? What would be the points where you would find some way to communicate? Because I see a lot of that stuff coming from hers, not pessimistic, but there's a sense of like we have to face the reality of how things are, that ecologically, when we look at systems decline and so forth, there's just some places that are past point of no return. She does have an optimistic view in terms of her sense of being discerning, and we do what we can where we are to be better with those that we're relating to, but she's not particularly optimistic about where society is going. And so here we are with this big gap to bridge, going back to your dream, right? We have the two different nets. And what's the leap across that bridge around people who are thinking in more sophisticated ways? Because, there's an example of someone who's a sophisticated thinker. I don't know how tooled up with integral she is necessarily, but then, listening, all right, what are the ways that we bridge these gaps?
Thank you. Yes, I don't know Meg Wheatley, but yes, a lot of excellent people are working very hard, and the ecological crisis on the planet is one of the aspects that is in our faces, forcing us to be our best. And there are other people who know more about that than I do. Now, I have a kind of a long-range picture of the history of climate on the planet, but I don't want to go into that now. But my question, the reason I am passionately engaged with this, to take it to a fairly high level of abstraction, is that I am confident that there will be a next emergent order and that it will be more or less integral. How far things will break down before things start getting better. Now, I know as a historian just how bad things can get in some of the dark ages included ecological collapses. I am hoping that we can pool our wisdom higher, practical and higher, so that we can mitigate the suffering and transit this particular turbulent phase with less suffering rather than more. And that's why I'm taking the trail. That's why I don't just sit at home and read and crochet and do Sudoku. I am looking for that middle range where we don't freak out in fear and we don't give up in despair. And we pool our resources and move through. Yes, the ecological crisis is dire, and things are going to be very different 100 years than they are now. How can we make it through without too much human suffering, or will we make it through to the integral world era with horrific consequences for hundreds of millions of people? I would like to see us do it with less suffering rather than more. So that's the best I can do. And let's see, Sandy and then Lorraine, maybe?
Yeah.
I appreciate the bridging in terms of the concept of less suffering. I'm a historian. I actually teach American history. And one of the things that I noted as I was teaching, is this dynamic of this repetition trauma, how there is like a continual reenactment of traumas that are not resolved. And what's been interesting for me, I've been doing a lot of work with Thomas Hubble, who, there's a lot coming out now about the nature of trauma. It's really interesting how quickly that's come and pervaded our world, understanding the dynamics of it physiologically, psychologically, sociologically. And there's a lot of very interesting, very specific tactics that are emerging that are incredibly effective and quick, actually, that are really emerging very quickly. I just wanted to share a little bit about what I've been seeing in that as a part of an activity of I'm not sure how you put that, in terms of what Wilber was talking about, like bringing into flesh or manifesting our vision of the integral, or however that was. But in terms of what I see that is doing that, and I feel like that's an important piece. Maybe I don't know if what you do here. I've only been a couple of these meetings. I'm more involved in Gebser, and I'm calling them like scouts for Gebser. I think it's really important for us to be paying attention to see where, however you want to put it, the integral is manifesting, however it is, and be like reporting and reflecting on that. That's, and it's not like, oh, let's just talk about what the good is. It's like, yes, let's see, and then, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then resonate with our personal, our skills have. How do we bring it forth? In what way do I act as a midwife for this? And that feels like a really vital, important process in part of what you evoked with what Ken Wilber was talking about. It's like, what do I specifically do? And I just want to reflect very quickly about what Thomas Hubble is doing, because he's really interesting. He has a real kind of a spiritual consciousness, but is very grounded in bringing things to actually do. He calls himself a mystic in the marketplace. And what he's done, he has a really, really well thought out and well practiced process where it's like learning about how you deal with healing personal trauma, and then seeing how that's connected to ancestral trauma. And you use the similar processes, but then there's collective trauma, and it's all woven together. And that the skill sets you can learn developing and working with your own personal trauma can be applied, particularly with groups with a real intention and practice, to be working on healing collective trauma. And Hubble has been doing that work for quite a while, where he will actually bring in like the descendants of Nazis and like the descendants of Holocaust victims together, and creates like in very specific ways, kind of creates an energetic field that enables a dynamic of trauma healing to happen that has an impact on the collective. So, there's much more you could say about that, but there's people really doing very pragmatic, and it's not, it's not just how can I be away from this world and think of the good things. It's how do I take my awareness of the bigger picture and see what practical, pragmatic things we can actually be doing that have an impact. And whatever we are skilled at doing feels like the thing to do, because you can go, well, what difference is if I make a garden in my community? The world is going to hell. It's like, well, but that's what you do. And if like you get whatever, how many millions of people, because there's a lot of people doing what I would say, what is doing, manifesting the integral. There's a lot of people doing it, but how do you hear about it? You've got your groups here, but I'm involved in a number of different groups, and there's a lot of people very catalyzed, and people are getting more and more catalyzed in terms of the urgency, but also what skill sets do they have? And, you're not seeing them doing out in the streets, whatever, but they're there. And I feel like that's a piece of this, is how do we connect our network? Like, how do you do that here? And then you go like, okay, here you go out in the world. What's your network look like? Where are you seeing the integral being manifest? How are you doing it? And it's not like I'm only saving my animals in my community. It's like, no. I am doing that piece of it. Like the puzzle metaphor is such a good one. The jigsaw puzzle. You have one piece and it's a blob of green. You're like, what the hell is a blob of green? And then you go, oh, put it together, it's a tree. Yeah. So I feel like that's an important piece, is to have both perspectives. It's like what's going on, like what Karen just so artfully evokes, but also go down into our place here. Why are we here? I feel like we are all here to be part of this. We're all midwives. And what skill set have you developed? And you don't do the things you can't do well. You do the things you do well. And then you share it. And I feel like that's an important part of creating a supportive net. I love your metaphors, Karen. It's creating that net. And that's how we do it. The net that bridges it is pragmatic, but it's meditating, but then it's being here as well. So thanks for having share that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well said.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I wanted to add one more trend that I think is very interesting. And that's with, speaking of trauma and healing and stuff like that, is the work being done with psychedelics. And what an influence that could have, like people going just to solve their personal problems. And now they've got this expanded consciousness that they bring to the world. And as more and more of that happens, I could see that contributing to the rising tide as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a quick thing about that. Now, I love, Sandy, that you brought up the idea of trauma. There are several, right? I'm a psychologist and I've focused on trauma and treating trauma in the last 10 years. And there are a number of psychologists who speak to societal trauma, generational trauma, and we are steeped in it. We're just becoming aware of it. We're becoming aware of what it does to our bodies. And all of these people who are storming the Capitol or whatever, of course, they've got trauma in their background. So this notion of paying attention to trauma, I agree with you completely. I think it can be a core principle, but I think we also have to look at ourselves. And this is where shadow work, I think, can really help. Shadow work is very hard and very terrifying. Yes. And the integral community sometimes has a way of talking about it like it's an exercise. We'll just do 10 minutes. It's like, what? We have shadows that we have to take a look at. One of my shadows is I love intellectualizing about stuff, but is that real? And does that connect with somebody in the red meme, who's behaving in accordance with their life conditions? Isn't that what spiral dynamics is? Your behavior and your life and your level of functioning is directly tied in with what your life conditions are. Mm-hmm. If a green person walked into a world that was a red world, they'd be killed. They wouldn't survive. The red meme people know how to survive in a red meme world, and this is, a lot of what we see in the Capitol. They feel absolutely threatened. So I think we really need to look hard at ourselves and even our country. Our country, one of the biggest shadows it's got is slavery. Another shadow about this country is individualism. Once it helped build this country, now it's killing us. And greed is no longer good as it was in the 80s. So, somehow, if we can address our own limitations, then maybe we can honestly reach a hand to others and help them with what they need. But I do think that self-awareness has to be part of it. And Eloy, I'm sorry, I just have to mention on the psychedelics, one thing to be aware of, and I'm not familiar with all the research that's going on right now, but I do have some experience with a patient of mine undergoing that treatment. My understanding is there are no real protocols yet. I mean, while you're taking ayahuasca, somebody's playing the guitar. And I don't think that's going to lead to any constellation of useful thoughts or any remediation of anything. I think it's still got to be done in the context of, you know, someone helping that person deal with the monsters that arise.
That's absolutely going on, though. I mean, and people are actually leaving psychology to be guides because they want to do it outside of the medical establishment and keep their patient confidentiality.
Yeah, you're right that there are issues with using those, those drugs. But anyway.
Well, Lorraine, absolutely amen to everything you said about the shadow. It is urgent work. It's not easy. And it is essential for us to be doing it as we move forward. And that's a whole huge subject. We could do a whole presentation on the shadow and shadow work. I followed Jung a lot on that, and Marie-Louise von Franz and so on. And as we move forward into the next world order and the ones beyond that, we are going to need to be dealing with shadow issues individually and massively. But we have the concept now, and this is one of Ken Wilber's genius, that he said, you know, the best of the East and the best of the West, the understanding of the human shadow was not part of any of the traditional wisdom traditions or their spiritual practices. This is something that we are layering on now, and it is hopeful that we understand about this. And trauma mediation, we need all of it, absolutely. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And Regis has his hand up.
Yeah, so I'm actually starting a whole thing. I have an entire project underway called the Vision Logic Project, and that's all about
I hear you very well, Regis. Can you speak up a little bit?
Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got a whole Vision Logic project, I'm calling it, and the idea is I've actually got it up on my whiteboard here. Well, I'm also participating in other groups that are trying to do that for therapists, medical professionals, and also coaches. So there's a whole other movement. I've been invited to multiple. The problem is it's an extremely privileged thing. Every single one of these three groups has a, you know, $8,000 to $25,000 entrance fee. Do you know what I'm saying? So, so I'm obviously not going to be doing that either, but I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, there's a guy in Peru just grew up like that. He's not charging $25,000 for some colonized version of that thing. Do you know what I mean? So, so yeah, it's effective, but I will say that the substance itself is the teacher. And so this is a thing I think we got to remember, is that every time I've done psychedelics, what's profoundly with me is that the fact of that beingness, or there's a personality of some kind, the outer skin of the planet or something, which is also with me there. So to say that that's not a real thing in these, I mean, for me, one experience that I had was just that the mycology had sort of digested all the things that ever were, and so in some sense had already had a lesson, had digested all the lessons and the life meanings of all the different beings that had ever, you know, sort of existed on the planet, and they were appropriately choosing the thing to help me. And so this has been my experience, and I've read an awful lot of things about ayahuasca and other stuff. They often refer to that as a mom, you know, or a mother. So yeah, so that is another thing to just maybe keep in mind.
Thank you. Yeah, up in your forest on Vancouver Island. Wow. Larry, you have your hand up.
Reluctantly. There's some just wonderful stuff coming up in this conversation. I feel like there's sort of a frothy edge forming in terms of key ingredients, not necessarily all of them, but many key ingredients that are so important to addressing the topic of this conversation, the interplay and the playfulness of agape and eros. Realizing that trauma is inherent in so many ways in all cultures around the world. The need for shadow work, which requires the ability, as Lorraine points out, and I've always known, not always said, I maybe made it look, try to make it look easier than it is, the importance of shadow work, looking at oneself and knowing how to deal with the amygdala and understand the place of the amygdala, how it serves us and how it hurts us as evolving human beings, the place of the amygdala. And there's a place for the practicality of all this. So yeah, Eros, Agape, how can we make this practical? How can we bring it into the world without abandoning the so-called higher? And there's no judgments around higher or lower, it's just one way to frame them or position them. Two key pieces I'm seeing in doing all of this work, as it were, is on the left, typically identified as wokeism. On the right is typically identified as MAGA. These are two extremist groups politically positioned as left and right, Dems and Republicans. And they're really neither one. These are trauma situations,
Yes.
trying to get voiced out.
Yes.
And to be heard and to be healed and to be loved and held.
Yes.
I've been looking at this for a long time and don't have any easy answers for it, but it does come back to looking at helping people get better looking at themselves, which is the shadow work. And trauma is not easy to be with for oneself who's experienced it, let alone work with it, as Hubel, I'm sure, is willing to jump into pointing out. So wokeists and MAGAs, and to look at it from a partisan perspective, like to look at it from the left, well, the MAGAs are the ones that are messed up, not the woke.
Yeah.
Looking at it from the right, well, it's the woke that are messed up, not the MAGAs. From an integral perspective, it's not like one is wrong and one is right, or one is messed up and one's not messed up. They're both in positions, in my experience, an opinion of having been traumatized in different ways. Like the woke are super sensitive. Some could say that MAGA is just the opposite. They're not sensitive at all. And they're coming from, I think, damaged experiences, abusive situations. I see the value in being super sensitive. I see the value in not being sensitive. It's situational. Mm-hmm. And it's messy and it's thick and it's difficult. And this is what we're called to do as integralists, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And the higher is wanting to come into the lower is wanting to go into the higher. There are two things happening at the same time, and they're really just one thing happening. And we can know it that way. And it's not easy in terms of functioning in a mind, in a human mind, in a human body. It's not easy. It's going to be painful and difficult. And I think that's just necessary. And to look at painful and difficult is not bad things. If we take it into a suffering dynamic, I think that's dysfunctional. And we might call that as a bad thing. But pain and difficulty, it's just part of what's on our plate as integralists.
Yes.
Because every human being, whether we can understand it or not, in the words that I'm using in all this, in the last 5 minutes, it's just what's there for us. Yes. And we can look at it, we can approach it, we can be with it, all we can do is do what we know how to do. I think Sandy was addressing this point.
Yes.
All we can do is what we know how to do.
Yes.
And not try to do it all. Challenge I've had as an integralist, as a side note, is looking at how can I do it all? Well, I kind of abandoned that pretty quick. So in a sense, yeah, it's work and it's play. To Karen's point around agape and eros, how can we play with it? How can we be with it and engage in MAGA and woke and anything else in between in ways that are healthy? That's the big word for me, is not good, bad, not right, wrong. What's healthy? Healthy physically, healthy emotionally, healthy mentally, psychologically. healthy as a soul,
Beautiful.
healthy as a spirit being in a human experience. What's healthy? And getting clear about that, and knowing that we're going to get our knees scuffed, our elbows scuffed, and trying to participate in all that and do and not do something with all that, how to navigate the do's and the don'ts of that. It's messy. As Integral knows, it's messy. As Wilber has pointed out many times, being at the frothy edge, it's not real clear cut. So letting messy be okay, letting trauma be okay, in a sense of we have to acknowledge its existence, and then it's something we can work with and move into and through. Yeah.
Beautiful, 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 Larry. Yes, it's my metaphor for this is compost. So that some of the nastiest shit can make the best fertilizer, but you got to work with it as compost, and it's messy and it's stinky and it's backbreaking. But this is, and my hope with the kind of,
and it's healthy.
I like
compost isn't a bad thing. It's healthy.
But if you work, but you have to work it.
Yeah,
right.
Its place.
Otherwise, it stinks and it causes disease.
Yeah, I don't want it in my bedroom, but it's got its place. Yeah.
You want it in the compost heap in the garden.
Yeah.
And you can grow beautiful vegetables with it. And my hope, by taking adventures into these abstract realms, we can learn how to open our consciousness into those realms where it's all the divine Leela and it's all part of the divine plan, and then bring that back down into our embodied lives and tackle these urgent problems, these messy problems, with wisdom and compassion and healing, and help bring it all about to a healthier balance. That's what I try to. Beautifully said, Larry. And I think we have time for Sandy to come on again.
Can I add real quick as a follow-up?
Sure. Sure.
Bye, everybody.
Something that's sorely missing, in my opinion, as integralists, how are we integrated with each other to move forward these issues, these topics, these agendas, these whatever? How can integralists get better at being integrated with each other? Which seems ironically just missing in so many ways.
Fortunately, we have Zoom.
Okay, Sandy.
It's what are resonant two things you said, Larry. One is the Eros, Agape, and then more. There's always more to talk about this. I feel like it is part of this, like that our engagement in the love of our experience, like the enjoyment of the flowers that Karen evoked, or just what's in our life. And when I talk to people, it's like, oh yeah, it's like going out to the ocean, or, being in the natural world. It's like reconnecting is such a source for the Eros Agape, dynamic. And like sharing that was interesting in our breakout room, little bits of sharing that we got to do, but it feels like that can be a piece of like what you're saying, like how do you get integral in your integralness is part of like being conscious of what you take out of here, like, oh, that was an interesting thought, but going, oh, where is Eros and Agape in my life? And more, I would say there's more. And it's not just like the meditation where you're gone. It's like, yeah, often it's like you're saying, Karen, like that happened a couple of weeks, 30 years ago. It's like, no, how do we live it? How do we live? How do we embrace the embodiment? Because I feel like, as you saw from my themes of all the questions I asked, we have an opportunity by embodying, by being here physically and going to the Eros there. Because isn't that a really universal place for it? And so like part of like as an integral part of your practice, go out and like be in the world and open your body and your senses to taking in the world. And that's like, it's like you're cleaning the creation place for the, for Agape, I think it's all clogged up. That's how I envisioned what trauma does, clogs up those pipes between the, so like, let's clean out the pipes, and there's all kinds of ways. But one of the ways, and I think this could be a very universal one, it's like, is just embracing the gift of our physicality, the smell, the taste, the touch, the sex. Like, boy, this interest, I read how many people saw the interviews that Karen did with laymen about sexuality. I feel like this is really an important pathway because, boy, is that a universal interest. And we can see how, it is not serving us the way it's manifesting. But how do we bring that in as a way of our Eros Agape connection? But like just talking about it in these groups is really a helpful process. And I bet you get people really interested in that. And it's like, well, what does it look like? What does that actually look like? You just came out of, I haven't read that Wilber book, but to me, it's about embodiment. And I feel like Wilber's kind of something about the body, I'm learning
Showing
about
up.
that. It's embodiment and it's our practice. And however we can practice is like, I'm having a good time while people suffer. You're embodying it and you are doing the work that you need to do. And I just want to point out, take a look at some of Thomas Hubel has a podcast now, but he does these things. He very regularly, he'll have these, online conferences like Healing Collective Trauma. And there's 50 people sharing about what they're doing. And he has a global reach. He's globally impacted. He's like a node of connectivity. He brings people in. And so it's like the people who are doing healing trauma on every level and every method, is woven into his collective embrace. And so there's a lot going on in all kinds of ways and all kinds of levels. And it's very engaging and interesting to kind of see that and to share that. So, hey, I think you guys I'll be part of it. It's like an integral, a scout group. It was called that. What are you doing that feels part of it? And it's like, well, I'm not saving the world. It's like, no, that's not what you're here to do. You're here to do something that's part of you. And then how are you embracing Eros and Agape? And what the heck is that all about? Isn't that a provocative question? So I'd come back for that.
Wow. Oh man, my harvest from this, thank you. Yes, trauma clogs the channels. The Eros and Agape flowing through us to the world and back to the transcendent. Trauma is what clogs the channels, and that's our work. Yes.
And there's other things that clog the channels. Trauma is an obvious one.
What are some of the other things?
Well, I'm just thinking they're subtler, meaning less bombastic. Just forms of thinking. I mean, for example, bigotry, for example, is a way to clog it, being bigoted about something. Even fear of doing shadow work, another way of being clogged. Lack of a willingness to look at ourselves, even in the moment, even as I am, Larry, speaking right now, I'm looking at myself and being aware of what I'm saying. Not even being willing to do that can be an example of clogging. So there's degrees of clogging, so to speak.
Okay.
The more salient one probably is trauma. So I don't know which is more important to be. I guess what's important to address is whatever you feel open and ready to address. Whatever I feel open and ready to address. That's back to Sandy's point. Whatever's on your radar, whatever seems to be showing up as, wow, this is what I'm noticing. This is what I'm dealing with.
And that's the work.
Let that be it. Yeah.
For this person.
No judgment about, oh, this is better than that. Hey, it's what's in front of you.
All right, Karen, I could see the follow-up to this talk, which is like the Eros Agape pipe, what clogs it, what gets rid of the clog. I mean, it's like, there we go. Here was like the whole concept ready to be explored.
Okay.
That'd be awesome as your follow-up here. Like, let's get pragmatic and share and talk to each other and inspire and,
Okay, I think you folks are the pragmatists here, but I'll be part of the project. And I see we have gone past the hour. What a rich conversation. Thank you all.
Yeah.
For sticking with. So,
well,
Jerry,
thank you, Karen.
are you the host now?
I'm the remaining host, yes. We want to wrap it up here. So thanks for your presentation, Karen, and all these great comments and a lot of really generative dialogue showing up here, and we're glad to to be a part of allowing that to happen here tonight. So thank you all so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was wonderful. Thank you all for showing up, and wow, stamina, staying the whole 3 hours.
All right. Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.